Hello, and welcome to the podcast with Dr. Debbie called The Shift Happens. Thank you so much for being here. In today's episode, we're going to be working on the topic of forgiveness and connect to the Divine Mother. If you're joining me from the school challenge, on school, we've been working on we call it the FGHIJ challenge. The idea of this challenge is when you notice your mind, because remember, a lot of times we're on autopilot, right? Like, got to get the kids, got to do this, got to do that. And that autopilot nature, we're just swimming. And a few days ago on the challenge, we talked about the observer mind, when you can literally observe yourself. Now, many times, I'm just as human as you are. I get into that rabbit hole of like just living life, doing the dishes, doing this, da, da. But then I'll have a glimmer of a moment that I'm like, oh, right, observe. And in that glimmer of the moment, you have a choice of FGHIJ. That's the whole idea of this challenge. F is forgiveness. G is gratitude. H, asking for help from the Divine Mother. I, receiving insights from the Divine Mother. And J, being joy. So let's make it really simple. If you're not in gratitude or in joy, you want to pop into F, H, and I. Make sense? And that's why for the last few days on the challenge, we've been really working on gratitude. Cool? And if you're not doing the challenge, you're like, what is she talking about? You're listening to this on your podcast. Hop over to my website. You'll see I've got an account on School, SKOOL. It's a free membership. You can see a lot of great videos and shares, and you'll get so much more out of this challenge and the work I do. But today in today's podcast, we'll be working on forgiveness, connected to asking help and insight. And the help insight we'll talk about very briefly, but mostly this challenge, this podcast is about forgiveness. Now, the human definition of forgiveness is very different than the spiritual definition of forgiveness. The human definition of forgiveness is that you wronged me, and I am going to be a better person and pretend it didn't happen and pretend I got over it. And I'm just going to walk away. I forgive you. That's what the human consciousness of forgiveness is. There's a spiritual definition of forgiveness that I really love. Let me own my thoughts around this matter, and let me go to the place where that thought does not exist. When people use that second definition of forgiveness, they heal their bodies, relationships, health, money. It's insane. Now, I will be honest with you, it can take a little bit of a while or immediately for the body to shift. And I have seen it countless times. The reason sometimes time becomes a factor is most commonly because we're so addicted to that thought, or we don't even know what the thought is because we're so down the rabbit hole. But if you ever come to one of my workshops or work with me on some stuff online, you will find that thought. That is my job. That's what I'm really good at helping people with. And then giving it to the divine and asking for help and trying to find that place where the thought doesn't exist is actually what we're going to be talking about in today's episode. But if you're listening to this episode by podcast or on School or on YouTube, doesn't make a difference. Please listen to my next 2 or 3 because they're very much connected to this. And just one little plug before I dive deeper into forgiveness, just a little favor to ask of you. If you're listening to this on my podcast channel, please leave me a glowing review. Apparently that helps the algorithm. I don't know what an algorithm is. And if you're listening to this on podcast or on YouTube, share a comment and or share it with a friend and hit like. And apparently that increases the views. I don't know what it does. I would really appreciate that. The last little plug I'll ask you is if you feel a pull to work with me more, I have 1 or 2 spots left in my online group coaching containers, which happen on Tuesdays, either at 12 or at 5. And then I also have a class online that I teach on Wednesdays at 9 or 5 Pacific time. That's called the Inner Temple. That's all about working with the Divine Mother and healing our minds. If you'd love to hang out with me in person, which is really where I jam, in person is my baby. I love in person. I have a workshop here in Vancouver on March 28th. then one in April, and then one in May, all in the Greater Vancouver area. The one in May is a 2-dayer. The one in April is 1-dayer. And I've got some retreats in Whistler in June and September that are 2.5 days. The beautiful thing about my retreats and even my 1-day workshops, it literally is a contribution base. I have a minimum that I ask you to invest. So the 1-day workshops are $100. My 2 days I think are $250. My 2.5 days are $500 because you're making a much bigger commitment. And then you can invest that much or more, whatever you feel called to pull. It helps me cover the costs, but in addition, the profits from all my in-person workshops are going towards placing, opening a Divine Mother Retreat Center and or a Divine Mother bus so we can take this work across North America. So please think about that and contribute. And that would be so much fun for you to meet you in person. Okay, enough of that. Let's talk about forgiveness. Forgiveness from a spiritual point of view, the ego does not love. What is the ego? The ego is not a real thing like you can see my hair or my beauty mark. The ego is a mental construct that thinks you are separate from love, that thinks you're separate from the Creator. The ego lives in fight, flight, freeze, and it is trapped in our nervous system, and it gets our thoughts to go really, really fast and always trying to figure things out. And the ego's job is to block love. The ego got created in the moment that we separated from our Creator. The ego isn't bad, it's not wrong, it's not something you're trying to push against, but you're actually trying to wake up the true voice of love that sits inside of you, that is of love and for love. And if you're listening to this podcast and are aware of energy even just a little bit, you would have felt a shift in frequency when I went to that place of love and for love. And the more you find that frequency in your body and mind, the more you open to gratitude and joy and healing. The point of getting you to be aware of that is that there is a neural pathway that sits inside of you that only holds thoughts of love, and the ego will fight it like no tomorrow. And it's not about fighting the ego back or making the ego wrong or going down a rabbit hole of saying, I'm never going to figure this out, but it's surrendering to love. And the more you do that, the ego thought systems get smaller and smaller. They're not gone away, but they get less invasive into your mind. And then the more you wake up the thoughts of love, the more you actually start to heal. So what is forgiveness from a spiritual standpoint? It's going to the place where the ego thought system does not exist. On the school community, I asked people to share where they're stuck so I could angle this podcast accordingly. And some of you talked about, that you're stuck in the way that the mind is saying you're not enough, you got to do more, I don't fit in, something's wrong, lack of money, and so on. Let me show you a quick picture if you're watching this, and if you're not watching, I'll describe it. Your mind is this circle. So if you're not watching, just imagine a circle. And in the middle of the circle, draw a line in the middle. Half of the mind, half of that circle, hash it out to make it dark, and the other half of the circle, keep it white. Imagine you're doing this on a white piece of paper. The white is the divine mind. The hashtag is the ego. The dark side's not wrong. This is called the split mind. Every thought from the ego can be brought to the Divine Mother. So the Divine Mother, which I will talk about more in detail in the Help and Insight podcast. Every thought of fear from the ego, like I don't fit in, I don't belong, I don't have enough money, wants to be taken to the Divine Mother. And if you're willing to do this work, you will receive insights, you will shift your mind, you will heal your body. And so forgiveness is going to a place before the thought even existed, because the ego isn't real. You are a consciousness of love. And as most of us who have heard Marianne Williamson's quote, our greatest fear is not that we're not good enough. Our greatest fear is that love of the divine, which is who we truly always have been. I'll share a small example before I do a bit of a wrap. So one of the things I struggled with growing up was racism. I grew up in Windsor, Ontario in the 70s, in the late 60s, and there was a lot of racism. There were like 4 brown families, and it's a bit of a blue collar town, still is. And so I dealt with a lot of racial insults through my grade school, high school years, and a bit in my university, but not as much. And so that was following me in my mind that, okay, I'm brown, I'm less than, and so on and so forth. And it wasn't there all the time as an adult, but it was kind of back there. And in my healing journey of my body, which I'll go into in my TEDx talk and so on and so forth, I'll go into other webinars about it or podcasts about it. I realized that fear or this thought that I was not enough was creating a lot of back pain. And one of the thoughts of being a brown girl who doesn't belong was part of that. And because it was so long ago, it wasn't running me as much. I sat with the Divine Mother, which I'll teach you to do in a different podcast, and I gave it to her. I took it from the dark side of the mind into the white side. And what the Divine Mother said to me, and she said, "You've never been a body. You're a perfect skin tone for you. Brown, white, black, blue, green makes no difference." And I knew that, but the way she said it landed in my heart like no tomorrow. And then almost instantly, my back pain went away. It was between my shoulder blades. So I'll teach you how to do that in other podcasts. But as I wrap today's, all I want you to be open to is that there's a different way to think. Whatever the blocked thoughts are of the ego, there's a different way to think. And that is called forgiveness. Let me go to a place where that thought does not exist. And when you go there, you will find love. Let's take a few breaths together as we wrap up today's podcast on forgiveness. I could talk for 10 hours on this topic. Let's take a slow breath in and a long breath out. Take a deep breath in and a quiet breath out. Just stay here for a quick minute. There's no future, there's no past, there's just right now. And in the now is where the forgiveness work occurs. Thank you so much for joining me. And again, please, if you could do me a favor, like this, share it, and put a comment. That would be amazing. And if you could give me a rating on my podcast channel, that would be even more amazing. I'm sending you so much love, and I hope to meet you in person or online super soon. Have the most beautiful day. Closing up from Dr. Divi. Thank you for being here.